Hello, and welcome to the Source One podcast. Consider us your source for insights and updates on procurement and strategic sourcing, anytime, anywhere. Today I'm joined by Source One Associate Director Jen Ulrich and Senior Project Analyst Nick Harasymczuk for the first installment in a three-part series on effectively sourcing facilities management services. This complicated spend area includes costs as diverse as pest control, custodial services, security systems, and fire protection. Before we get started, could you both introduce yourselves and give us a sense of your position at Source One?
Thank you. This is Jennifer Ulrich. I'm an Associate Director here at Source One. And one of my main areas of expertise is within the facilities management space, and that's really around executing strategic sourcing initiatives for my clients and really helping them to navigate through this area that's a little bit more complicated when it comes to the servicing aspect of running and managing a facility.
And hello, I'm Nick Harasymczuk. I'm a Senior Project Analyst here at Source One. As a Senior Analyst, I primarily develop ideas for current and potential projects that we work on, and I've worked with Jen on several facilities initiatives throughout the past year and a half, and focused primarily on optimizing both facilities, whether it be spend and or streamlining any services that pertains to any of the categories that Joan had mentioned. I also serve as the project lead here for additional project and support and manage a team of analysts and interns that are assigned to these respective projects.
Thank you so much. So why not start with the very beginning of a sourcing initiative? Whatever your spend area, it's crucial to collect data and establish an accurate baseline before going to market. Nick, could you speak to the importance of this process and describe what it typically looks like?
Well, we can't kick off any sourcing effort without an understanding of our project scope. To begin developing strategies and allocating resources, we've got to familiarize ourselves with our clients' goals, the specifics of the products and services being sourced, the timeline of the project, and the identities of all the relevant stakeholders. Once we're certain of all that information, we can start to collect the data. Conducting interviews with stakeholders and suppliers, we assemble all the detail we can about the client's past, current, and planned purchases. This means looking at contracts, statements of work, and other documents to develop our baseline. That provides our minimum starting point, hence the term baseline. Then the sourcing process can begin in earnest.
Are some categories easier to baseline than others?
That's definitely the case, but it really depends on what kind of information you're looking for and how the companies themselves, your clients, or the suppliers actually track it. Within utilities, for example, contracts and invoices typically provide a sufficient picture of current rates and usage. That's just based on the nature of the cost model within the supply base that necessitates that sort of historical tracking. This in turn makes baselining a much simpler process.
But achieving a baseline for facilities management spend is rarely so simple.
That's right. Within this spend area, companies are oftentimes managing multiple suppliers at varying levels of sophistication. This category is also heavily service-oriented and often based on time and materials type of cost models. Unless the suppliers are explicitly asked to track information such as labor hours spent per job, both capital and ad hoc type work, materials cost by line item including markup and unit costs, and any kind of ancillary fees assessed, they're unlikely to keep it for their own records. This is especially the case for those mom and pop shops using off-the-shelf technology to quote and invoice their customers.
And what are some ways a poor baseline can cause headaches for this category in particular?
Well, inventory management, for example, can prove to be both a tedious and daunting task if we're going in with data that's inaccurate and or non-existent. Unfortunately, the larger the footprint a company has, the more opportunities there are for data to be muddied and inaccurate.
Could you describe an example of an initiative you've seen slowed by poor data?
Absolutely. Recently, Source One was involved in a large-scale facility sourcing project for a client with over 200 locations throughout North America. These locations varied in size, region, and even country. While a streamlined single-source provider was the original goal with the majority of these facilities projects, we quickly learned that the amount of data available was just not sufficient. Conducting an efficient, standardized, streamlined approach nationwide would require more information and detail that simply was just not available. Market feedback was also unclear and was built around a variety of assumptions that did not align with the baseline data that we were able to capture. Many locations had scopes that were not able to be standardized, for example, additional kitchen areas to be cleaned, different types of sprinkler systems, multiple HVAC compressors, so on and so forth, and proved to be extremely difficult to standardize in one particular RFX event. It became clear that a shift in strategy was required.
What did that shift in strategy entail in this instance?
Well, our team began to engage directly with the incumbent suppliers at each location in hopes of leveraging a long-term contract, client-supplier relationships, and long-term strategic growth in order to achieve savings. This ensured that scopes were level set and eliminated service gap exposures. While our initial projections fell short due to this shift, we were still able to secure savings on a site-by-site basis. Of course, whenever a major shift in strategy occurs during a sourcing initiative, there are bound to be ripple effects. These can't be ignored. For example, our timelines had to be adjusted, resources allocated accordingly, and additional stakeholder engagements were required as we implemented the shift.
Sounds like all the more reason to strive for the most accurate baseline possible.
That's right. It's important to identify any gaps in your data that might create these challenges and develop a methodology for calculating savings that finance will support and recognize. Without data such as typical labor hours billed within a specific time period, it will be very difficult to forecast savings results on a labor rate reduction, for example. The same goes for materials markups. Without a detailed list of materials used, including quantities and markup structures, claiming savings on this spend will take some creativity.
So what can the creative procurement professional do to avoid or address these challenges at the baseline stage?
Well, it's always important to remember that a lack of historical data does not limit your ability to recoup these savings in the future by applying new best practices to contracting and billing. One effective best practice might be requesting that all future invoices be detailed at line item level. That way, in a quarter or 6 months, you can revisit the data for analysis or sourcing. Additionally, you can insist that contracts include language that tasks suppliers with providing more visibility into particular costs, so that an apples-to-apples comparison can be made in the future.
I'm glad you mentioned contracting, Jen. Our biggest takeaway from this particular initiative was the realization that our client did not have transparency into their line item costs across their facilities. To remedy this, we worked with the client to add binding language to every service agreement. Suppliers would now be required to provide line item breakout and details for any and all goods or services rendered on site.
And you expect changes like these to have a lasting impact for your client?
Absolutely. They're not only going to be able to better understand their spend, but also hopefully increase visibility into specific costs. This should mean greater savings and more efficient operations well into the future.
What other strategies would you suggest for companies looking to better collect data and assess their inventories before going to market?
Insisting on more transparent contractual language and greater line item level detail is a good start, but for companies with large amounts of inventory or several locations, like we've talked about here, additional long-term options should be considered. One option would be to look at a variety of facility management software programs that offer companies a chance to gain control over their supply chain operations and inventory. The big takeaway there is if you have a limited procurement team, something like a software program can help to make you more efficient. The costs can range from hundreds of dollars per month per service to annual subscriptions that can cost as little as $1,000 per month depending on the type of facility a company has to actually manage.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Jen. I look forward to continuing our conversation in the next installment. You've been listening to the Source One podcast. Tune in next time when we'll discuss going to market for facilities management services. For more information on sourcing across all spend categories, check out our blog, The Strategic Sorcerer. If you'd like to provide feedback or suggest a topic for future episodes, let us know at prrequest@sourceoneinc.com. Thanks for listening.